We're continuing our Lenten season and getting ready to begin the season of stewardship this morning with a passage that I know that many of you know. It's a familiar passage that comes from the Gospel of Luke. We're in chapter 4, and we're starting with verse 1. We're going to go all the way through verse 13. Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit in the wilderness, where for 40 days he was tempted by the devil. And he ate nothing at all during those days, and when they were over, he was famished. And the devil said to him, "If you're the Son of God, command this stone to become a loaf of bread." And Jesus answered him, "It is written, one does not live by bread alone." Then the devil led him up and showed him in an instant all the kingdoms of the world. And the devil said to him, "To you I will give their glory and all this authority. For it has been given over me, and I can give it to anyone I please. If you then will worship me, it will all be yours." Jesus answered him, "It is written, worship the Lord your God and serve only him." Then the devil took him to Jerusalem and placed him on the pinnacle of the temple, saying to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to protect you. And on their hands they will bear you up, so that you will not dash your foot against a stone." But Jesus answered him, "It is said, do not put the Lord your God to the test." And when the devil had finished every test, he departed from him until an opportune time. Friends, here ends the lesson. May God transform understanding into action. Amen.
I want us to think about our text this morning as a single narrative, as a story, as a book we just read from cover to cover. This isn't often how I advise we read Scripture, because there are often so many nuances and complexities we have to think about. There's often layers of context and culture and language that we have to sift through to find the real meaning. But I want us to think about this story on its own and find the meaning in this story. So we're going to go back over and think about this just like we would any other story in English class. Because ultimately, I want us to place ourselves in this. So first up, we have a setting. The story takes place in both the wilderness and in Jerusalem. The wilderness, worth noting, because that is where God met the Jewish people after their rescue from Egypt. It's where God promised them protection and covenant with them. It is where God shaped the Israelites into God's covenant people. Jerusalem is worth noting because it is the center of Jewish power, identity, and worship. Then we have our characters. We have Jesus and the devil. Jesus, the Son of God, born to save humanity through divine power. And the devil, who is cunning, clever, bold, and powerful. Two beings with power who have utterly different motives that are going neck and neck in this passage. And a plot. The story is largely dialogue, but we get enough background to know that Jesus has been alone in the wilderness, fasting and praying for 40 days. The text also tells us that that temptation has been perpetual throughout those 40 days, but we get to peek in on 3 specific temptations with the devil present. We're left to wonder, we don't really know what all occurred before that, but ultimately it doesn't matter, because we see Jesus triumphant and not succumbing to those temptations. And then the devil exits the scene. So first, the devil tempts Jesus to turn a stone into bread. Jesus has intentionally refrained from eating, fasting, and the devil challenges Jesus to exercise his power to be able to provide for himself. Then the devil tempts Jesus with the glory and authority of nations as far as they could see, and ultimately power over them. Then the third temptation is challenging Jesus with his ability to save himself. This temptation might be the one that stings the most, because the devil is challenging Jesus with the whole point of this wilderness thing. Why spend 40 days fasting and praying if you can just save yourself? Ultimately, the devil is testing Jesus on his level of selfishness. Now the theme. This is where I'm supposed to draw up an idea and preach on it. This is where I'm supposed to offer up something to learn in the form of a sermon. I don't have anything I want us to learn this morning. I want us to experience. So come with me for a moment into Jesus' shoes. Come with Jesus into the wilderness. If Lent is a season where we reflect on Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness, I want us to have a chance to practice being with him in those moments. To practice being undistracted and contemplative. To practice saying no to temptation. To practice prayer. To practice lament. Maybe take a slightly more comfortable position to be able to really focus and imagine yourself with Jesus. I want us to mentally, maybe even a little bit physically, take ourselves to a place where we spend 40 days completely undistracted. Obviously, we can't achieve 40 days in the next 30 minutes, but it's a mental thing. We got to get ourselves there. Maybe you need to close your eyes or focus forward on one thing to truly place yourself there. To imagine 40 undistracted days. But think about that and then some, because I'm not sure we as people know how to be undistracted. We run around so busy. When do we take time to ever stop and think or question what we're doing and why we do it? Do that now. Take a hard stop. Think undistracted with Jesus. I loved what Shannon said last week during the children's moment about Lent being a time to remove distractions from our lives. For me, that resonates with Jesus' 40 days in the wilderness and our 40 days of Lent. So I'm going to be quiet now, but go be with Jesus. Take yourself there. Oh, go back to Jesus. Now imagine staying with Jesus. Imagine someone comes and tempts you with food, with coffee, with steak, with ice cream. Now imagine someone comes and tempts you with power, with authority, with status, with money. Now imagine someone comes and tempts you with self-righteousness, with autonomy, with independence, with freedom. Jesus was tempted by these very same things just as we are. Preparing for this sermon, I Googled the most popular things to give up for Lent, and I was going to read many of them aloud. It was going to be a comical moment, but the sermon took a very different turn about midweek this week. So I'm not going to any longer. You can find me later if you want me to share some. Some of them were quite funny. But I do want to note, what I think it is important to note, that today, this Lent, 2019, what we are giving up as a society still fits into these three categories. We are still tempted and distracted by food, by power, and by self-righteousness on a very deep and human level. The easy conclusion here is that our greatest distractions, the biggest ones, are food, power, and self-righteousness, and that they have been since the time of Jesus. I've never been fond of this language of giving something up for Lent. It just never felt right to me. It never felt like it captured the whole of what we in the Christian life are striving for. To me, it feels like an easy way out. I think that's why I was so drawn to Shannon's language last week of removing distractions, because that implies a constant process of assessing new distractions and not stopping to pat ourselves on the back for a job well done, but always striving for better, for greater. Removing distractions is going to look different for each and every one of us. It takes knowing ourselves, paying attention to ourselves, and knowing what's going on around us. Being with Jesus in the wilderness requires slowing down, identifying what comes in the way of your quiet time, your focus on Christ, your ability to live out the gospel, and your soul care. What pulls you away from allowing yourself to be as healthy and whole as you can be? In this season of Lent, my encouragement to you is to deepen your understanding of what is preventing you from being as whole and healthy as you were meant to be. And then, once you have identified those things, taking steps to begin to address them. Maybe that is giving something up. That's okay. Or maybe it's just intentionally choosing to limit something, or scaling something back. Or maybe it's taking up something new. Whatever you need and whatever fits your distractions, do that this Lent, rather than getting caught up in the give up. But of course, I want to challenge you this morning to take that one step further this Lent. It is difficult to focus on ourselves when we remember we don't live in a vacuum. Preached on this several weeks ago, this idea that we are not whole and healthy as people of Christ unless all people are whole and healthy. It is so easy for us to get distracted by the pain and the sadness and the brokenness around us. As you spend time in the wilderness with Jesus, fighting through distraction and temptation, we inevitably have to process what else is happening in the world. I know that Jesus was lamenting in the wilderness. Because if there was not reason to lament, Jesus would not have had to go and pray and lament and fast for 40 days. So for us to be like Jesus, we must take up this practice of lament. This practice of considering the distractions and temptations that our world is experiencing that may not be able to be addressed by human hands or human power. That leaves us as people with very little to do but pray for the tragedies of our world and the pain that accompanies it, both for ourselves and those around us. Of course, we can think specifically of the tragedies that occurred this past week in New Zealand. 2 mosques targeted, 2 places of worship, 50 people dead. We are distracted at a level that is tragic. The shooters distracted by the need for power, for authority, for status, to be on the top. The self-righteousness told him he has every right to take the lives of anyone who does not comply with his worldview. The need for everyone to live, act, think, and worship as he does. And the rest of us, well-meaning individuals, are distracted by the things that prevent us from saying and doing anything because it seems so catastrophic. What impact could we possibly have? I get it, I do. It's daunting. I often don't know what to say, and I certainly don't know what to do. But I do know this. We have Jesus, who lamented on our behalf for 40 days in the wilderness. If we model our Lenten experience after Jesus' 40 days, we have the opportunity to begin to remove those distractions. So instead of giving up something insignificant, we can spend time in prayer, both to lament and to ask God to help us carve out of our life what is unhealthy. We can only take care of ourselves before we begin to take care of each other. This is going to sound cheesy, but it's really not meant to be. Weekly centering prayer is a great opportunity to learn about a new or different practice, to add more contemplation into your life and remove more distractions. We have been gifted, this is a gift, this time in the wilderness every Lenten season. Rather than use it as a time to give up, let's use it as a time to explore how to engage others, to navigate these tragedies, how to be whole and contemplative and prayerful, and to have less distraction and less temptation. I want to leave you with a quote from a Sojourner's article, which is a Christian publication, that I read on contemplation this past week. I, too, was looking for some reprieve and an opportunity to lament as an outlet this week and stumbled on this article on how to create space for contemplation in a life, in a world that is so busy and distracted. It said, "The contemplative life is fundamentally practice. It must be lived and with our whole selves. But we do not arrive at contemplation by mastering a technique. We come by way of simplicity." It is time that we practice clearing out the distractions, to simplify and to focus. Whether food, power, or self-righteousness, we must set it aside and clear it out. Our world is literally begging for it. Amen.